Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. In today's video, I have a new hairdo, but also we're going to pit the Fujifilm S3 Pro against the Nikon D200. That's right, Super CCD SR versus normal dang CCD. So, if you're in the market nowadays for a budget CCD camera, there's a pretty big selection of older cameras from Sony, Olympus, Pentax, and so many other brands. But today, we're going to pit the S3 versus the D200. Both of these cameras kind of come in at a similar price point, with the S3 on average being a little more expensive than the D200. The S3 sells normally for around 150 to 250 USD, where the D200 normally goes for between 150, well, 100 to $150. Now, there's a bit of a disparity there, but I feel like it is kind of close enough that if you're making the choice for some CCD goodness, that you kind of want to weigh the benefits and cons of either camera. And for this reason, I'm not going to talk about the S5, which is significantly more than both of these cameras. Additionally, since both of these cameras are f-mount cameras, I can jam the same lens onto both cameras, so we don't have to worry about adapters or crop changes or anything like that when we're comparing cameras. And in that way, we'll really get an idea of how the Super CCD really compares to CCD. So let's get into it. Fujifilm S3 and Nikon D200 main spec differences. Obviously, the first thing we're going to talk about is that Super CCD versus the regular CCD. The Fujifilm S3 uses Fujifilm's Super CCD SR. And if you remember from my first review of the S3, the sensor array is not a rectangular array. It is in fact a hexagonal or honeycomb-like structure. And what this means, at least from Fujifilm marketing, is that when you output the pixels and interpolate the image from its 6.17 megapixels up to 12.34 megapixels, that the resolution should be similar to that of a conventional bare filter array CCD at 12.34 megapixels. At least, again, according to Fujifilm. Now, this sensor is specifically used on the S3 and S5 cameras, and it also has a second trick in that there's a second set of photodiodes that are on the sensor. Again, in that honeycomb styling, and its design is primarily to allow you to preserve highlight detail, as the second set of photodiodes is less sensitive. This is what gives the S3 and S5 its dynamic range boosty. Now, the Nikon D200, this one right here, uses a very regular non-honeycomb, but in fact bare filter array style CCD at 10.2 megapixels. No magical structures, no interpolation for maximum pixel resolutionage, no special highlight protection sensor bits, just regular old Nikon color science. And additionally, both of these are APS-C sized sensors. Now, other things that are worth talking about on these two cameras is the fact that the S3 is quite a bit physically bigger than the D200. You can see as I'm holding them up, I'm going to try to orient my hands a bit better. Here we go. That you get quite a bit of chunk on the top. Now the D200 is a little it's a little wider than the S3, but overall I think the S3 is physically a bit bigger. And despite this substantial bigness, the S3 is actually only 10 grams heavier in weight, about 1% a plana of difference. Now, that's not a lot of extra weight for what is essentially a integrated vertical grip here. The other differences that are worth talking about is that the S3 uses the N80 film body as a basis for the camera. This uses a 10-segment meter as opposed to the D200's 1005 pixel metering system, which is more advanced. Additionally, something else to consider is that the D200 is able to meter all AI and newer lenses. The S3, however, cannot meter them, but you can still mount the glass on there, but it'll only work in the manual mode. AF is another difference that we should talk about. The D200 is using the more advanced Multicam 1000 unit, whereas the S3 uses the Multicam 900. The D200, additionally, it's a much faster camera. It shoots at 5 FPS, where if you use the S3 with its widest dynamic range setting, you only get 1.2 FPS. Lastly, the most notable difference that I'd talk about is that the S3 has live view. That's its weird, awkward claim to fame. It's a strange implementation, but it does have it, where the D200 does not. The main event, Super CCD versus CCD. I suppose that's why most people are tuned into this video. Now, we're going to have a look at a couple photos, but before we get started, I do want to say that on all the photos that I did on both cameras, I tried to set them up exactly the same. I shot them all on a tripod, and the photos were taken with the same lens and with exposure settings that were as close to the same as possible. Now, I also do want to say that the S3 Pro only does half-stop adjustments on exposures, and so not all the exposures are quite the same as on the D200. However, I realized that after the fact that I could adjust the settings on the D200 to match the half-stop increments. But yeah, at the time of shooting, I forgot, so whoops. But it should mostly be alright. The exposure settings were fairly close together. They weren't crazy off. I guess at most to be like a 6 stop-ish. So reasonably close. But for the first test, we're going to start with dynamic range. Now, clearly the Super CCD is going to probably have this one, and we'll commence it by using our super scientific backyard photo test, in which we look at my backyard bird feeder. In this original exposure, before I made any adjustments, the photo is about 3 stops over, specifically on the bird feeder, and in the next shot, I pull the exposure back 3 stops, and we can see the S3 is able to dial in the details back. The highlights on the S3's photo are recovered, and you can see that the detail in the bird feeder is retained. The D200, however, it doesn't have that superness in its CCD, and we lose quite a bit of detail to the sensor saturation on the feeder. Next, we have a wet dandelion as the test subject. And in the original photo, the dandelion itself is about 2 stops over. And again, when we drop back down 2 stops, the S3 preserves detail like a champion. The details in the water droplets come back, where on the D200, it loses it a bit. It's not nearly as bad as the first photo, but you can still see the difference in the ability to preserve highlights on the S3. So the Super CCD's dynamic range, that's the real deal. Although, you know, I do admit, in order to get that dynamic range back, you do have to use Fujifilm's own software to pull that detail back. It's actually not terrible, but I realized that when I was editing the photos for the video, the software itself crashed like twice, which is kind of weird. The next thing I do want to talk about and compare against these two sensors is resolution. Now, you can see in the detail of, again, the wet dandelions, the D200 does tend to extract more detail in its 10 megapixel sensor than compared to the 12 megapixel interpolated output of the S3. I admit the 6.17 megapixel array of the Super CCD does a pretty good job of interpolating up to 12 megapixels, but when you directly have images side by side from both cameras, you can see that the conventional sensor just is able to extract more detail overall, and you can see the interpolation not quite being able to keep up. Again, if in this particular photo, we'll look just at the water droplets. You can see that on the D200 image that there's just more pop in the droplet than on the S3. Now, in the next set of images, we'll just have a look at the images that I took side by side, the S3 versus the D200, and you can, again, judge for yourself what you think. All right, lastly, we're gonna have a look at high ISO performance. So neither of these cameras is gonna blow your socks off for high ISO. This is especially true if you're coming from a modern CMOS censored camera. That being said, in this video, we're comparing two old CCDs together, so you kind of know what you're getting watching this video. And that being said again, when we look at the interpolated output from the S3 at ISO 1600, you can actually see that the image appears to have quite a bit less noise. This, I think, is because when the interpolation is done on the image, you actually get quite a bit of smudging over of details and smoothing over of things. So the image does look more noise-free. However, detail is kind of crushed at ISO 1600. Now, when you look at the D200, you can see that the noise is more random in color. However, detail retention is excellent. And because of this, I kind of actually give the point to the D200, even though at a glance, the S3 kind of looks better. And that's because with the D200 images, at this point, you can run the images through modern noise reduction software. And again, I don't mean modern magic AI noise reduction, just like regular noise reduction. And the images that it outputs will still, retain those details while doing a pretty good job of suppressing the noise. To sum it all up then, Super CCD, 1 point, normal CCD, 2 points. So overall, I'm giving this win to the regular CCD. And I also want to just weigh in for other opinion-based things here, but I actually like the color output and the way that the D200 just renders things in general. I know it might seem a bit biased based on my D200 review saying that I think I did say it's basically a perfect camera, but that aside, with all the settings matched on both cameras, I just was like happier looking at the D200 RAWs. There's less I wanted to do to the images to make them the way I wanted them to look. And with the S3, there's more fidgeting that needed to be done. Admittedly, I'm not using the S3 to do portraiture, which is what it's famous for. So, take my opinions with a grain of salt, or a big block of salt, or a block of MSG. Tasty, tasty MSG. But MSG aside, what I'm saying is that on the D200, there's just less tweaking for me to do. Now, I do admit that with a little more effort using FujiFilm software, I could probably get the S3 images to look like the way that I want it to output. But the D200 ones are just they're closer to where I want them. Now that we're done with the sensor analysis, if you don't care about comparing anything else other than the sensor, feel free to leave the video, but not after a like, subscribe, and a comment maybe. However, if you do want to hear me compare the D200 to the S3 some more, keep watching, because we have more stuff to cover. So let's keep going. Ergonomics and Feel. If you watched my D200 video, you probably already guessed what I'm going to say. The D200 is a better camera overall for ergonomics and feel. And that's because the D200 is about as perfect as it gets. And that's not to say that the S3 is bad. However, you can definitely tell that the Fujifilm S3 had to work around the fact that it's based on the Nikon N80 body. And this at times kind of slows down the experience, and not in a fun way, just in an annoying way. And I'll show you an example of that. Let's say you wanted to change ISO settings on the S3. First, you have to, if you look at the dial there, you have to change your dial to your ISO dial. And once you have that, you are now out of your PASM mode and into your ISO mode. And now you can change your ISO settings with your command dial, which is all fine and dandy. But then, you know, when you want to go back to shooting, you now have to move your PASM dial back to whatever mode you're shooting on before, and then you can resume shooting. It's kind of annoying. If you look at the D200 and say you want to change ISO, it's easy peasy. Simply hold your ISO button here. Oh, let's see if it'll focus. This button there. And scroll that command dial. And your ISO changes. Let go, and you can go back to shooting. You don't have to worry about changing your PASM modes back or whatever, because it'll just go back to what it was on the fly. You know? So it's the little things like that which kind of slow you down on the S3. Now, there are other examples of this as well. On the D200, if you want to change your custom settings, you simply hit your menu button and you enter your custom settings menu and then go for it. Everything's there in plain English, and you can scroll around and change and tweak to your heart's content. And then, you know, if you want to shoot, half press the shutter and you're out of the menu, off you go. On the S3, again, because it's based off the N80 body, you change out of whatever shooting mode that you're in, you roll this into your custom button mode or custom mode, and then you look at your rear LCD and you go through it kind of like you would on a normal camera. And then when you're done, you have to, again, change your dial to whatever shooting mode that you're on, and then you can continue shooting. It's kind of just a weird way to do it. Admittedly, I know why they did it. It's because the ISO and custom functions option were on the N80, and don't change it if, you know, it's the parts that you're given, but it does slow you down in a weird way. Now, the thing that's coming up that's a little more annoying though is the finder. Again, this is due to the fact that the S3 uses the N80 body. Now, if you look through the finder on the N80, like so, you will notice that it's a bit small. And that's because the N80 finder is just masked off, since this camera was initially a full-on 35mm, you know, film camera. So you get a big old mirror. Well, let's see if I can. There we go. You get a big old full mirror on this camera. So in order to make that finder match up, they just masked that portion of the finder off. Whereas on the D200, this is built to be a digital SLR, and it's built to have that APS-C crop. So the mirror is smaller, but that prism is more optimized for the application. So you do get a brighter and bigger finder on the D200. As for feel, this is definitely subjective for sure, but I do like the denser feel of the D200. The materials feel better, and I'm not actually a massive fan of battery grips. On the S3, it's not that it's uncomfortable, it's actually pretty well sculpted for, you know, your hands. But the materials, they're just a bit lighter, a bit plasticier. And like I said, the battery grip isn't really my thing. I really like using smaller bags when I go out. I know, that sounds weird coming from me, the guy that shoots big old phase one, digital SLR. However, when I do like just casually grabbing a camera and going, the S3 battery grip sometimes slows me down, since not all my bags can accommodate the awkward shape of the S3 with the lens already on it. It's not a problem if I usually, take the lens off, put a body cap on and a lens rear cap on, and just pack it all into a bag. But that's way less annoying than just taking the D200, dropping it in most any bag, and just going. So yeah, D200, just it's easier to pack. Now, the other thing I do want to talk about is the rear screens. Both of them are actually relatively fine. Again, not bad for its age, and if you actually think about it, the S3 screen is technically higher pixel density, since it is a smaller screen, but almost the same number of pixels. Overall, for the ergonomics and feel, I think that's still a win for the D200. Overall shooting experience. Actually shooting both of these cameras, when you have them side by side, it kind of makes the S3 feel pretty slow. The D200 is really responsive, and generally it still feels like a modern shooting experience for an SLR. You review images fairly quickly, you can scroll through menus fairly briskly, and you're not really waiting for the camera a lot. Whereas on the S3, you're kind of waiting for it right from the get-go. When you start up the camera, the actual N80 bits power up pretty quick, but the digital bits kind of take another like half second for things to spool up and you can actually get a shot in. When you're, again, reviewing images on the D200, you press the image review and you're good to go. When you're reviewing on the S3, you press it, you wait, it loads, and you want to zoom in, it loads some more. And when you're doing stuff like actually taking photos, the D200 is, you take a frame, you immediately see it, and you can do things. You grab the S3, you take a frame, you see the LED for writing an image go on, and you realize the entire back of the camera is locked up until that LED goes off, and then you can review your image, zoom in, do things. It's just a bit of a slower experience on the S3. Sometimes it's pretty annoying, other times I don't mind it so bad, but when doing this video where I had both cameras side by side, I really felt the S3's slowness. That being said, when it came to things like acquiring focus, the D200 and the S3 were fairly similar. They would both acquire focus fairly quickly if you're using the center point, and they're just shoot. Again, another difference I noticed, just partly because I had the D200 with me, was that the D200 would take quite a lot more RAWs before the buffer filled up. It also didn't just absolutely lock up when it did fill. You could still kind of manipulate the camera. Whereas on the S3, I did talk about this in my original video, but once that buffer is filled, you are waiting a while for that to unfill. And while you're waiting, that camera is just sitting there. It is not doing stuff. And another thing about the S3 when you're shooting is that, again, I did talk about this a little earlier, but it doesn't have the aperture coupling for using AI lenses, which is a con and a pro. The con is that you don't get your manual metering like you can on the D200. However, this does mean that you can mount non-AI lenses with the S3. Again, they only work in manual mode, but you can put them on the camera. Whereas if you did try to put a non-AI, non-converted lens on the D200, you probably damage the coupling prong. So, you know, there's a point to the S3. But overall, again, win to the D200. The winner. It's the D200 right here. But, I mean, we knew that from the start, right? That being said, again, like in my original S3 Pro review, I'm assuming that if you do want the S3 Pro, you're in it for that super CCD high dynamic range experience. And that is fair. And the S3 Pro is, in my opinion, still the best value way to get that experience because they are still reasonably attainable and the stockpile of them still appears to be pretty healthy. Whereas if I'd tried to do this on the S5, the price would be way higher and there appears to be less of them going around. That being said, I do realize that if I did have the S5, it would probably have a lot of the pluses from both the S3 and the D200. But for me right now, for that camera, that price is still kind of hard to swallow. So I don't know, unless I get one at a pretty nice discount from the normal going rate, I'm probably not gonna grab one. With that all being said though, I still think that for the best overall shooting experience for a CCD camera, the D200 is the best option, bar none. The sensor output is stellar, ergonomics are nearly perfect, and its price is cheap as chips. They're also basically everywhere, so you can find them literally at any online used camera distributor, usually. But with that being said, what do you think of the Super CCD, or what do you think of my review of it? Do you care at all, or are you not interested in it in the least? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time. Bye.